And in this class, what we're doing is building upon what you've already received in terms of the development of leadership within the church and the task of pastoral leadership. What this task of this church or this course is to apply what you've learned elsewhere in the context of the small church. The thing we want to do is to ask ourselves, how are we effective pastors within the context of the small church? And we're going to do that by looking at three different areas of leadership. First of all, in terms of the context of ministry. If we're to be effective in the small church, we need to understand the context. What is different about the small church from the large church? And how does that affect leadership? How does that affect what we do? So we're going to look at the context of the small church, the rural community, how it approaches leadership, and how it views ministry. The second thing I would like for us to look at is how are we spiritual leaders within the small church? That as we fulfill our task as spiritual leaders, of being a pastor who seeks to challenge people to grow in their relationship with Christ, how can we do that within the small church, and how is it different than the larger church? So we're going to look at how we influence the people. How do we influence the congregation? How do we influence the community in which we live? To recognize that if we're in a rural area, we have a role and responsibility. And how can we recognize and accept that role and responsibility so that we're impacting that community for the gospel of Christ? And then the third thing that I would like for us to look at, and really look at as an application, is how do we apply administration in the small church context? Certainly how we would organize and how we would plan and how we'd strategize. A large corporation from a small family-run business would be radically different. And the same is true of the church. And so how can we be effective in our planning, in our organizational structures, in the development of an effective ministry in the context of the small church with the dynamics of the small church? And so those are the questions that I would like for us to examine as we go through this course together. That we're going to be looking at the small church and how we can be more effective in the context of the small church.